Welcome to this, the final video in my Death Row Dinners series 2022. And there was only one case I could pick to end the series with. What better than a case committed on Halloween where the very symbol of purity and virtue was snuffed out by evil. Sit back, get yourself some ice cream, and I will tell you about Johnny Frank Garrett. I have here 4 tubs of ice cream, which is a local Scottish brand. Johnny Frank Garrett's last meal was ice cream, but it doesn't say anywhere how much or what flavours. So I've got 4 different flavours. I went for banana, cotton candy sparkle, which I have absolutely no clue what that actually is, mint choc chip, and white chocolate Twix. So I'm going to put 3 of these back in the freezer and go through them one at a time. I may get through all 4, I may not. We'll just have to see how it goes. But enough rambling. Let's get into the details of this case. Mint choc chip, not a flavour of ice cream I normally go for, but one that I know is popular. So I thought I'll give it a try. Certainly very green. And very delicious. It is a very creamy, subtle, minty taste. I really, really like this. On Christmas Eve, 1953, Johnny Frank Garrett was born in Oklahoma. His mother was Charlotte Jo Cameron, but I couldn't find any information on his father. He did have siblings, 2 sisters who are still currently alive, named Janet and Gianna, and apologies if I get any of the pronunciation of names wrong. As a young child, Garrett was raped by his stepfather, and he was also pimped out by him to other men. Garrett was just 10 years old when he was first introduced to drugs and alcohol by members of his family. He was only 14 when he was forced to participate in sexual acts and homosexual pornographic videos. Throughout his short life, he abused substances such as paint thinner, which can cause lasting damage to the brain. He was beaten on a regular basis and ended up scarred from being put on a burning hot stove. By the age of 17, Garrett and his family were living in a home across the street from the St. Francis Convent in Amarillo, Texas. One of the nuns who lived there was 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz. She was born in Switzerland in September 1905, but had spent most of her life devoted to God. Excellent chocolate chip distribution in this ice cream. But I digress. And most of this time in service to God, she lived in the Texan convent. She followed the strict routine of convent life, waking at 5 a.m. to make herself a cup of coffee. At 6:30 a.m, she joined the other sisters in the on-site chapel for the morning prayer according to the Liturgy of the Hours, one of her favourite prayers. She believed that the structure of this particular liturgy helped to bring together nuns from every country together as one, united in their faith. It was therefore highly unusual when, on the morning of October 31st, 1981, Sister Tadia failed to attend. One of her closest confidants, Sister Angela Martinez, was concerned, and once prayers had ended, she gathered a group and together they went to check on Sister Tadia. When the nuns arrived at her bedroom, the first thing they noticed was that the door was closed. Sister Tadia, 76, was known to be hard of hearing, and as such, she would leave the door ajar so that she wouldn't miss the morning alarm. Upon entering the room, Sister Angela discovered the naked body of Sister Tadia lying on the floor. Her face was bloody and her arms outstretched. One of the group went to take her pulse and found her cold and unresponsive. It was assumed that she had gotten out of bed, fallen and cracked her head and passed away lying on the floor. Although she was old, she'd exhibited no signs of frailty or weakness. Her passing was a shock, but it was not unexpected given her age. She had led a good life. 4 of the nuns carefully wrapped her body in a sheet before removing it from the room and going to make arrangements for the funeral. Later that day, another sister, Sister Florentine, went to Sister Tadia's room to pay her respects. When she entered the bedroom, she noticed that the window was broken. This was something which, in the shock at finding Sister Tadia lying on the floor, none of the other nuns had actually noticed. This revelation led to the sisters making the decision to call the police and report that there had been a break-in. Even at this point, they did not connect this with the death of Sister Tadia. When officers arrived, the body had already been removed from the bedroom and taken to the local funeral home. One of the deputies investigating the break-in happened to overhear the nuns talking about the death of Sister Tadia, and if it hadn't been for that, they would have been completely unaware that a death had actually occurred. Wanting to quickly rule out foul play, the deputies went to the funeral home to examine the body. They discovered significant bruising around Sister Tadia's neck, and it seemed apparent that this had not been a natural death. Cotton candy sparkle, it's pink. I have no idea what to expect. It's got bits in it, sprinkles, which I guess is the sparkle. Candy floss, I think, but it's really, really nice. It's not sickly sweet. I like it. On with the case. The fact that this was not a natural death horrified the nuns, but things were only going to get worse. Sister Tadia's body was given over to the care of a nearby mortician, Dr. Ralph Enderman, for him to carry out further examination. By this time, the body had already been partially cleaned and arterial embalming had already been carried out. The nun had abrasions around her neck area and contusions to her head. The cause of death was manual strangulation, though there were some knife wounds to her chest. He discovered that before being strangled to death, Sister Tadia had been raped. Whilst semen was found, no tests were conducted to try and find out the blood type of the assailant. Black, curly hair, pubic hair, was found in her mouth. This was enough for the police to declare Sister Tadia's bedroom a crime scene and to call in forensics for further investigation. I think I like this better than mint choc chip. This is amazing. I was not expecting it to be this good. Bear in mind, I am a food channel. I do have to comment on the food, despite the fact that I am relaying a very serious series of events. I am not taking this in any way flippantly or lightly. These are real people, real lives. Forensic investigators began to work their way through Sister Tadia's room. In the process, they discovered a large bent steak knife under the bed. This had been used to cut the screen on her window so that the attacker could gain access to the room. And it had also caused the non-fatal stab wounds to Sister Tadia's chest. Fingerprints were lifted from the handle of this knife as well as from the headboard of the bed, and they believe the attacker had held on to this during the attack. The occupants of nearby homes were questioned about whether they had observed anything or anyone unusual in or around the area about the time of the attack. Several people reported having seen a youngish looking man running away from the convent in the small hours. Police originally thought this crime could be linked to the rape and murder of 77-year-old Nani Cox Bryson. She was killed in her Amarillo home in the early hours of July 9th, 1981, just a few months prior to the attack they were investigating at the convent. Entry to her home was also gained through a window, the screen cut, the window broken. She was also raped, beaten, stabbed and strangled to death. A white shirt was also left by her bed. A white shirt was also found in Sister Tadia's bedroom. The suspect in the case of Nani was believed to be a Cuban refugee after a neighbour reported having seen a dark man in the vicinity before the murder took place, and a second witness said they had seen a dark man in their garden. A security guard near the convent also reported a dark man in the area shortly before the attack took place at the convent. However, on 9th November, the results of the fingerprint analysis, the prints that were on the knife and the headboard, came back. They were a match for 17-year-old Johnny Frank Garrett, already known to the police. Officer Walt Yerger had been responsible for checking fingerprints that had been recovered from a number of burglaries in the area. And these, as well as those found in the convent, reportedly matched Garrett's. This led to him being arrested and charged with murder. It's worth mentioning that during the spring of 1981, there were 10 other reports of elderly women in the area being raped in their homes. None of these were ever connected to Garrett, nor to the murders of Nani and Sister Tadia. There was a media frenzy around the murder of an elderly, innocent nun on Halloween. A woman calling herself Bubbles, claiming to be psychic, actually called in to a local newspaper to tell them she had had a dream in which she saw the killer. He was a teenage male living near the convent. Bubbles claimed that she had tracked him down and could pinpoint the house in which he lived. The teenager she implicated was Johnny Frank Garrett. Bubbles. This case was the first multi-agency case in the history of Amarillo, and it led to the creation of a special crime unit. The pubic hairs recovered from Sister Tadia's body and bedding were determined to have characteristics similar to those of Garrett. That sounds very, very similar to a previous case I talked about. A steak knife of the same brand, design and manufacturing process as the one found under Sister Tadia's bed was found in Garrett's home. Sergeant Claude Stevens testified that the fingerprints in the bedroom could only have been made by Garrett. Garrett's explanation for this was that he had actually broken in a few days previously, intending to steal valuables. He claimed that he entered through the front door at around midday, and he obtained the knife from the cafeteria. He entered several of the bedrooms, and one of these happened to be that of Sister Tadia. She was asleep, and he leant on the headboard as he was reaching up to take a valuable-looking cross that was hung on the wall. Hearing a noise, he then fled and hid out at his mother's house until the following morning. Up next, banana. It's important to mention that no recording and no signed copy of a confession by Garrett exists. Officer Yerger was one of the men who heard, took down and typed up Garrett's alleged confession. Garrett, under the influence of drugs and alcohol, had supposedly broken into the convent because he had heard that the nuns had nice stereos. Because we know in the 80s, those nuns, after prayers, they did like a bit of MC Hammer.
Stop! Hammer time!
He broke into the bedroom of Sister Tadia, saw her lying in bed, and asked her if she was going to scream. He covered her mouth to ensure her silence, choking her until she lost consciousness, raped her, and then left the same way he came in. This is what Officer Yerger claimed Garrett had confessed. This is a very creamy, delicious banana ice cream. Not artificial tasting, but I prefer the cotton candy sparkle. I feel somehow I shouldn't, but I do. During the trial of Garrett for the murder, one of the nuns, Sister Bernice Nogler, testified that Garrett's version of events just couldn't have happened. The front door of the convent was locked, and it remained locked unless there was a scheduled visitor. At noon, the cafeteria was always busy, meaning that Garrett, a young man in a convent full of nuns, would not have gone unnoticed. There is no way he could have got into the cafeteria without being spotted, let alone obtained a knife. Theft was considered to be a grave sin, so there was no need for any valuables to be locked away. The explanation, therefore, that the knife was bent because it had been used to try and jimmy a lock, it just didn't hold water. The nuns all took a vow of poverty. They didn't have anything of material value in the convent, and certainly not nice stereos. I mean, do they think they were listening to Like a Virgin or something? The state prosecutor also called on two neighbours of the Garretts. One of them testified that they had seen Garrett sneaking around the property of an elderly neighbour on the night in question. A second neighbour testified they had seen Garrett on their property round about 11 p.m. on the 30th of October, the murder having taken place in the early hours of the 31st. Although Garrett's mother Charlotte and some other members of his family corroborated his alibi, because they were his family members, this was discounted. The bishop of the local church actually told police that Garrett would often come over and help out, and that could involve things like moving furniture around. Furniture like beds, headboards, heavy items. The defence decided not to bring this up in court. Garrett was reviewed by several psychologists in the lead up to his trial. 3 experts found him to be extremely mentally impaired, psychotic, and brain damaged as a result of the horrific abuse he had suffered in his younger years. None of this evidence was presented to the jury at trial. Instead, only the relevant evidence and witness testimonies were presented. Garrett had a court-appointed attorney, Bill Collius, a man who had never defended anybody on a murder charge before, let alone a capital murder charge where the death penalty was on the table. This man had previously worked under Danny Hill, the district attorney, who sought the death penalty against Garrett. Conflict of interest, anyone? Bruce Sadler was the attorney who then worked on Garrett's appeal, and midway through this, he quit. He went to work for the district attorney, Danny Hill. Danny Hill was elected to the office of district attorney on the promise of a tough stance on crime, a man willing to use the death penalty often to rid the area of heinous crime. Hill stressed to the jury that were they not to go for the death penalty, Garrett would be released back into society. He would undoubtedly kill again. Johnny Frank Garrett was convicted and given the death penalty in September 1982. He was just 18 years old. He was held at Ellis Unit, north of Huntsville in Texas, for 10 years whilst he awaited an execution date. This was finally set for January 6th, 1992. But he was spared when an appeal for clemency came directly from Pope John Paul II. He contacted Ann Richards, the governor of Texas at that time, and reminded her that not only does the Catholic Church preach forgiveness, but it was against the teachings of Christ to take the life of another in revenge. He also argued there was evidence coming to light that Garrett may be innocent of the crime. The white shirt found in Sister Tadia's bedroom was never tested. Footprints outside the church were never matched to anyone, and certainly not to Garrett. White twigs. As a result of this, Richards made the decision to grant a temporary reprieve whilst things were looked into further. This meant there was a possibility that Garrett's sentence could be reduced from the death penalty to life imprisonment. This hearing was heard by the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. All 17 members were required to vote on whether or not to commute Garrett's sentence. They unanimously voted against, believing he was guilty and deserving of the death penalty. Garrett continued to protest his innocence. When his mother would visit him, he would tell her he hadn't done it and that he couldn't get hold of his attorney whenever he tried to contact him. This ice cream is incredible. I think this might be my favourite one of the four. Johnny Frank Garrett was executed on February 11th, 1992 by lethal injection. He was only 28 years old, and he insisted that he was innocent until the end. His last words are rumoured to have been, "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me, and the rest of the world can kiss my ass." His sisters have gone on record to state that they believe he was innocent. A man named Leoncio Perez Rueda was eventually tried and convicted of the murder of Nani Cox Bryson just 3 months before the almost identical murder of Sister Tadia Benz. He was rumoured to have admitted to the sexual assault of a nun, and in 2004 DNA evidence definitively linked him to the murder of Nani. And he pled guilty to this as part of a deal that ensured he would never be charged with any other crimes that could be connected, and no testing would be done on any evidence that may link Rueda to them. That is a very specific deal, in my opinion. Garrett was a white man with light brown hair. Rueda was Hispanic. His hair was dark. A dark-skinned man was seen in the area around the time of Sister Tadia's murder. Black hairs were found in the mouths of both Nani and Sister Tadia. In 1994, Dr. Erdman, who had carried out the autopsy on Sister Tadia, pled guilty to 6 felonies related to falsifying evidence and botched autopsies. Following his conviction, dozens of exhumations were carried out to redo the examinations. A 1992 investigation reportedly demonstrated that at least 100 out of 300 autopsies he had conducted were found to be flawed. He did not preserve the semen recovered from Sister Tadia's body, meaning no testing can ever be carried out on it. He didn't preserve it because nobody told him he had to. Do you need to be told that you have to? So as an innocent man convicted of the murder of Sister Tadia Benz, there's no doubt that there were gaping holes in the case against Garrett. It also strikes me as highly unlikely that a 17-year-old is going to commit rape and murder with no build-up to that offence. The similarities between the murders of Sister Tadia and Nani Bryson, they are just huge coincidence, if it is indeed a coincidence. Two different killers beating, raping and strangling elderly women in the same area at the same time, unconnected to one another. And what about the other 10 women that were raped? Garrett had certainly been part of the juvenile justice system, but he had also been horribly abused and irreparably damaged as a child. His sister, Janet, says that he didn't finish high school and he had a history of petty crime. Petty crime is very different to rape and murder. He was 17 when he allegedly committed the murder, yet he was sentenced to death. Now, I do not know what the laws are in Texas or what they were in Texas in the 80s and 90s, but 17 is a minor, legally a child. The Supreme Court rules that a person who is insane or lacks capacity to understand the reasons for an execution cannot be put to death. Despite the evidence of abuse, psychosis and brain damage, Johnny Frank Garrett was deemed competent not only to stand trial, but to face death. Prosecutors insisted that he was aware not only of the crime, but that he understood the ramifications. Johnny Frank Garrett never gave a signed confession. The confession that was typed up, he refused to sign. Yet he was still put to death. I want to thank those of you who have been with me throughout this series. I have certainly enjoyed researching these cases, and I have found it shocking, informative, and at some points deeply saddening. My channel is a channel of entertainment, and this has been a set of videos dealing with something very serious and very real. Very different to my usual content. I think it's important that we learn from crimes like these. We learn what to look out for. We learn how we can perhaps protect ourselves and protect those we love. And we perhaps have our eyes opened to potential flaws in the system designed to serve and protect. This wasn't an easy series to make, and I'm sure at times it hasn't been an easy series to watch. But thank you. Take care, and I hope to see you back here for the next video, which I promise will be lighter.